I once thought the most painful thing a family could do was play favorites. But I was wrong. The worst pain is when they steal your name, your signature, and your future, then stand in court, look you straight in the eye, and call you the traitor. My name is Sienna Brennan. I'm 32 years old. And if there's one thing I understood early in life, it's that in the Brennan household, I was never the chosen child. Melody, my younger sister, was always the light in every room. She knew exactly when to laugh, what to say, and who to hug, making everyone feel special. My father bragged about her in front of relatives, and my mother's voice would soften whenever she called her name. I was different. I was quiet, liked peace and order, and preferred numbers to small talk. I didn't know how to make people feel comfortable the way Melody did. And in my family, that was treated like a flaw. I was labeled early on as selfish and cold, simply because I didn't express my emotions the way they wanted me to. Whenever Melody made a mistake, the whole family rushed to protect her. But when I was merely quiet, they called it attitude. I grew up feeling like I was always standing outside a circle everyone else had been invited into. I still sat at the same table, still showed up for every holiday, still called them family, but I was never truly treated like an essential part of it. There were years when I tried to change. I practiced smiling more, saying the things they liked to hear, acting gentler like Melody. But eventually, I realized the problem wasn't the way I behaved. The problem was that my role in that family had been decided a long time ago. Melody was the pride and joy, and I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who always had to try a little harder and still was never enough. I was never the kind of person who could charm others. So I chose to become good at the things I could control: school, work, discipline. As a child, I studied to keep the peace. Later, I studied because numbers never betrayed me the way people did. I understood balance sheets better than I understood the disappointed look in my mother's eyes whenever she glanced at me and then turned to smile at Melody. When I passed the CPA exam at 26, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. I remember calling home that day, my heart racing like a child hoping to be praised. But my father's response stopped me cold. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't ask how hard I had worked. The first thing he said was, "So when are you getting married like your sister?" I stood there in silence, phone in hand, feeling my joy collapse inside me like a balloon with the air let out. My achievements were never considered worthy of celebration. In my family's eyes, a professional certification and years of hard work meant less than an early marriage and 2 small children. My parents paid Melody's rent for the first 5 years after she got married. They supported her in every way, from tuition to daily living expenses. As for me, when I graduated burdened with student debt, I had to figure everything out on my own. No one asked if I needed help. No one reached out a hand. I learned to stay quiet because speaking up would not have changed anything. After many years, I stopped waiting for their approval. I worked, paid off my debt, built my career, and learned to stand firmly on my own 2 feet. But deep down, a part of me still hurt from knowing that to my own family. No matter how hard I tried, I would always be the daughter who was missing something. Things did not explode all at once. It started with small favors, then slowly turned into a dangerous pattern. Everyone in my family assumed it was my job to rescue Melody whenever she got into trouble. 3 years ago, Melody called me, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry, and said her car's transmission had failed. Derek's income was unstable, and she needed me to lend her $15,000 to buy another car. She promised she would pay me back within 6 months, but all I felt was a cold heaviness in my chest, because Melody still owed me $8,000 from the last time, money I had never seen again. and for which I had never even received a proper thank you. I said no. I did not raise my voice or accuse her of anything. I simply explained that I could not keep lending money when the previous debt had not even been addressed. That same night, my mother called me sobbing, asking how I could be so cruel to my own sister. 6 months later, Melody asked me to co-sign an apartment lease because her credit score was not strong enough. I refused again. I knew exactly what being a guarantor meant. If she missed payments or walked away from the lease, I would be the one left carrying the consequences. My father responded by giving me the silent treatment for 3 straight weeks. No calls. No messages. Just a deliberate wall of cold silence meant to make me feel guilty. They never argued with reason. They punished me with distance. In this family, saying no was never just a refusal. It was always turned into an act of betrayal. I gradually realized that what they wanted was not voluntary help. What they wanted was unlimited access to my money, my responsibility, and my life, simply because we shared the same blood. Every time I tried to set a boundary, my family reacted as though I had committed some unforgivable sin. No one ever asked why I needed to protect myself. No one stopped to consider that Melody kept borrowing, making promises, and then acting irresponsibly. The only thing they saw was that I would not do what they wanted. I remember my nephew's 5th birthday very clearly. At the time, I was in the middle of an important client audit, and if I had walked away from it, I could have damaged my reputation at work, possibly even put my job at risk. I called to apologize, sent a gift ahead of time, and thought that was the respectful thing to do. But that evening, Melody posted a Facebook status that sounded harmless on the surface, yet was clearly aimed at me. It's sad when some people forget that. Dozens of people agreed in the comments, including Aunt Patricia, who wrote, "Some people only know how to think about themselves." I stared at my phone screen and felt that familiar sensation wash over me again. And they were telling a story about me, and I was not even allowed to speak my part in it. That was when I began to understand that the problem was not just the direct criticism. Worse than that, they had built an entire image of me in other people's minds. Sienna the cold one. Sienna, who only cared about money. Sienna with no sense of family. And because they told that story for so long, so often, and so consistently, eventually everyone believed it. There were times when even I started to doubt myself, wondering whether I really was too harsh, whether I really was the one at fault. But the more they pressured me, the more I realized one thing: if I did not protect myself, no one else would do it for me. In the Brennan family, love always came with conditions, and kindness was reserved only for those who knew how to obey. I created an email folder called Family Requests not because I was bitter, but because I had started to fear my own memory. When several people keep telling you at once that you are selfish, that you promised something, that you are overreacting, that you remembered it wrong, you begin to wonder whether you really are the problem. I needed proof to remind myself that I was not crazy, that what was happening was real. I saved everything: emails asking for money, text messages asking me to co-sign, the guilt trips that came after I refused, even the seemingly harmless sarcastic remarks made at family gatherings. At the time, I had no idea that folder would one day save me. I only knew that every time I opened it, I could see the same pattern clearly. Melody needed something. I said no. The family got angry. And somehow I became the villain. Over and over again. That repetition calmed me. It showed me I was not imagining a system of favoritism. I was living inside one. I started being more careful with every exchange. If Melody called asking for something, I would send a follow-up email confirming the conversation. If my mother made a vague comment about how I should support the family, I wrote down the time and what she said. I was not doing it to prepare for a fight. I was doing it because I understood that in my family, memory could be bent to fit whatever they needed. A vague comment today could be turned into a firm promise tomorrow. And if you have ever gone through the experience of having your own relatives twist your words, then you will understand why I had to do it. If this story speaks to you, leave a 1-inch the comments so I know you are still here. Because sometimes, even the smallest sign is enough to remind us that we are not alone. The day the letter from the bank appeared in my mailbox, everything changed. It looked completely ordinary. The kind of envelope people receive and casually toss aside with ads and utility bills. If the heading had not said second notice, I probably would not have opened it right away. But something about the way it was presented made me pause. I tore it open, glanced at the first few lines, and the first thing I felt was cold. So cold that my hands started shaking. The letter was about an overdue mortgage payment for a house at 4847 Willowbrook Lane, Lakewood, Colorado. I had never heard that street name before. I had no idea what house it was. But right underneath, in clear print, was the line cosigner Sienna M. Brennan. I read it again and again, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. But they did not change. My name was there, attached to a $682,000 debt that I had never agreed to take on. I called the bank immediately. The employee on the other end of the line was polite, professional, completely unaware that the sentences she was speaking were tearing my life open. She confirmed that my name was on the cosigner documents, that the account had been opened 14 months earlier, and that the primary borrowers were Harold Brennan and Melody Brennan Cole. I told her there had to be some mistake, that I had never signed any paperwork. She replied that my signature was in the file, and that the documents had been notarized. Which meant that not only had someone forged my name, but someone had officially certified it as real. I pulled up my credit report while I was still on the phone. There it was. That debt sitting there like a boulder tied around my neck. The contact address listed on the account was my parents' house, the place I had left more than 10 years earlier. By the time I hung up, I sat frozen for nearly 10 minutes. I had not just been betrayed. I had been dragged into a massive debt without knowing it. As if my name and signature were nothing more than shared family property. That night, I called my mother. I had not prepared what to say. I only knew I needed to hear her explain, in her own words, what was going on. She answered in a cheerful, almost warm tone, as if nothing was wrong. But one question from me changed the entire atmosphere. Did you put my name on a mortgage loan? The silence on the other end lasted so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Then my mother said, "We were going to tell you, but what I can never forget are the words that came after." My father took the phone and said firmly that this was a family matter, that Melody needed that house, and that because I had a good job, I should have helped. Then my mother got back on the line and said 5 words that still haunt me to this day. "We decided you should pay." They did not ask. They did not get my permission. They did not discuss it with me. They decided. As if my salary were part of the family budget. As if my life were simply a resource they could allocate to support Melody's dream of owning a home. I reminded them that I had paid off my own student loans by myself, while they had supported Melody in every possible way without ever expecting her to pay them back for any of it. My father brushed that aside immediately. He said I had always been difficult, and that this was the moment for me to do the right thing for the family. When I said plainly that this was fraud, my mother began to cry, the familiar kind of crying she had used all her life to turn herself into the victim. My father even said, "Using your name on a few papers is not a crime when it's family." That sentence made everything clear. This was not some desperate decision made in a moment of panic. They truly believed that because I was their daughter, they had the right to use my identity however they wanted. And when I objected, they were not ashamed. They were angry that I refused to cooperate with the plan they had already made for me. After that call, I did not sleep. I sat in front of my laptop until nearly dawn, reading line by line about the consequences of an overdue mortgage with my name listed as cosigner. I work in finance, so I understood better than most how numbers like these can destroy a person's life. If the loan went into default, my credit score could be wrecked for years. Debt collection calls would begin. I could be sued. Worse than that, the career I had spent more than a decade building could be seriously damaged. My industry is not one where people ignore credit history. When you work with financial statements, audits, and clients' money, personal credibility is not just a private matter. Many companies review employees' credit, especially those in sensitive positions. A default or suspicious financial record could cost me promotions, or even my job entirely. My father once asked what I needed money for when I did not have a husband or children. I had known the answer for a long time. I needed it to protect my own future, because no one else was ever going to do that for me. That was the moment I understood this was not just another family lie. This was a direct attack on my stability, my reputation, and my sense of safety. They had not only taken my signature, they had taken away my ability to plan my life on my own terms. And if I stayed silent, if I sacrificed for the family the way they expected me to, I would be paying with far more than just a monthly mortgage bill. I sat there in the middle of the night, the glow of the screen lighting up my dark kitchen, and realized that the most painful part was not the debt itself. The worst part was knowing that the people who were supposed to protect my future were the very ones who had mortgaged it away for my sister's dream. At around 2 a.m, I called Marcus Webb. If there was anyone in my life who understood both the law and the way my mind worked, it was Marcus. Back in college, we had taken the toughest accounting classes together, stayed late in the library, drank terrible coffee, and kept telling ourselves that one day all of it would be worth it. Later, I went down the CPA path while Marcus moved into real estate law. When he answered, his voice was still heavy with sleep, and I almost wanted to apologize and hang up. But I had no one else I trusted. I told him everything. The letter, the call with my parents, the loan, the forged signature. All of it. Marcus was quiet long enough for me to know he was organizing the facts in his head the way a lawyer does. Then he said very slowly, "If you didn't sign it, this is signature forgery and identity fraud. This is serious." Sienna. Hearing someone else say out loud what I had been afraid to name made everything suddenly clearer. I was not overreacting. I was not imagining things. I was the victim of a real crime. Marcus told me the first thing I needed to do was get every document, the loan application, the notarized papers, anything with my name on it. Then he asked whether I had any proof that I had never agreed to cosign. And that was when I remembered the email from years earlier, when Melody had asked me to cosign an apartment lease, and I had replied very clearly that I would never guarantee any loan for her. I opened my family requests folder, found the email, and sent it to Marcus at nearly 3 a.m. Before we hung up, Marcus said something I have never forgotten. Your signature is your promise. If someone forges it, they are not just stealing money. They are stealing your integrity. That sentence locked everything into place. From that moment on, I stopped seeing this as a family tragedy. I saw it for what it truly was, an abuse of power, identity, and trust, and I was not going to let it slide just because the people responsible shared my blood. The old email I had sent Melody 3 years earlier was only a few lines long. But when I read it again, it felt like I was holding a life preserver in my hands. In that email, I stated it plainly. I would not sign for her, would not guarantee anything, and would not share financial responsibility for any of her debts. There was nothing vague about it, no wording that could be twisted into consent. I remember that when I wrote it, I simply wanted to be clear so there would be no argument later. I never imagined that same clarity would one day become the foundation for protecting my entire future. I forwarded the email to Marcus, along with everything else I had: old text messages, notes, screenshots. Every attachment I sent made me feel as though I was taking back a small piece of control. For years, my family had made me think that keeping evidence was cold, unloving, almost heartless. But that night I understood something different. Sometimes holding on to the truth is not cruel, it is the only way to save yourself from being rewritten. Marcus called me back not long after he had read the email. His voice was fully awake now, sharp in the way it gets when he is dealing with a real case. He said this was exactly the kind of evidence a court would take seriously. It did not just show that I had refused financial help before, it proved that Melody had known my position for a long time. That made any story about Sienna gave her word much weaker. I leaned back in the kitchen chair, staring at the computer screen full of emails from my family. And for the first time in hours, I did not feel completely powerless. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a shapeless mess. It was turning into a record, into facts, into data, something that could be compared, is proven, and brought into the light. And if you are still following my journey at this point, please give this video a like. Sometimes even one small click can help stories like this reach people who need to hear that protecting yourself is never wrong. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. I was not going there to reconcile. I went because I knew I had to look them in the eye and tell them I would not take on that debt. The moment I turned into the driveway, I knew something was off. Cars were lined up in front of the house, several of them unfamiliar. My stomach tightened. When I walked inside, I saw not only my parents and Melody, but also Aunt Patricia, Uncle Ronnie, Grandma Ellen, and several cousins. The table was set for 12 people. This was not a holiday dinner. It was a staged family trial. Melody was the first to stand up. She crossed her arms and looked at me as if I were the one who had caused all of this. My father told me to sit down and said the family needed to have a serious conversation. I did not sit. Aunt Patricia leaned forward and said I had always been selfish, and that this was my chance to prove everyone wrong. The air in that room felt thick, heavy enough that I could almost feel the pressure against my skin. I said very clearly that I had not signed any papers. Melody immediately shot back that I had promised to help during Christmas dinner 2 years earlier. I asked her what date, what situation. She said I had nodded. A nod. In my family, apparently, one vague gesture was enough to be turned into a $682. Zero contract. I felt angry and almost bitterly amused at the same time, though there was nothing funny about that moment. They all looked at me as if they were waiting for me to give in under the weight of collective pressure. But for the first time, I did not feel guilty. All I saw was a group of people trying to distort reality in front of each other, convincing themselves that if enough of them repeated the same lie, it would become the truth. When I still refused, the atmosphere in the room shifted from pressure to threat. My father shot to his feet, his chair scraping hard across the floor, and spoke in the tone I had known since childhood, the voice of a man who had made a decision and did not tolerate being challenged. He told me they were giving me until December 15, or I would be sued. I remember staring at him for several seconds just to make sure I had heard him correctly. Sued. By my own parents. Over a house I had never agreed to buy. I asked them what exactly they planned to sue me for. My father said it was for breaking a verbal promise, and that Melody would testify that I had agreed to support them financially during a family dinner. I turned to look at my sister. She avoided my eyes, then wrapped her arms around herself like the injured party. Not the person who had helped steal her own sister's identity. I asked her directly. "Are you really going to lie under oath?" She answered that it was not a lie if she remembered it that way. That response sent a chill through me. Not because I was surprised, but because for the first time, I heard Melody admit, in her own words, the kind of morality she had been living by all along. My mother rushed over, grabbed my hand, and started crying, begging me to think about my parents. Those tears had shaken me for years. But that day, when her hand touched mine, all I felt was cold. I told them they had committed a crime, had stolen my identity, and were still trying to force me to take the blame for it. My mother answered with the same line she had always used: money in a family is not stealing. I pulled my hand away as if I had touched something dirty. As I walked out the door, I heard crying behind me, accusations, and Aunt Patricia calling me ungrateful. But I did not hear the one thing that should have been in that room: an apology. I was almost at my car when I heard the soft tap of a cane against the concrete behind me. I turned and saw my grandfather, Harold, slowly making his way after me. The late November air was bitterly cold, and his breath showed white in the dark. He was 84 years old, unsteady on his feet now. Yet he had come all the way out to the driveway just to call me back. That alone made my throat tighten. In a house full of people who had just tried to force me to carry their debt, he was the only one who followed me not to scold me, but to tell me something that mattered. He asked quietly, "You shouldn't have to carry this." I barely knew how to respond. I asked if he had known about the loan. He admitted that he had only found out afterward and had tried to convince my father to stop, but failed. Then he told me to check the notarization date on the loan papers. "Something about it isn't right," he said. That was all. No long explanation. No dramatic intervention. Just one quiet piece of guidance from the only person in the family who still seemed to see me for who I was. When he placed his hand on my arm and told me that my grandmother would have been proud of me for standing up for myself, something inside me cracked open. I had spent too many years wondering whether I was really the problem. And now this frail, quiet old man, who had lived his whole life inside this family, was giving me something no one else ever had: the certainty that I was not crazy, not selfish, and not wrong for saying no. I hugged him gently, feeling how fragile his shoulders had become. Then got into my car. The entire drive home, I did not turn on music or a podcast. I just drove in silence and thought about what he had said. If my grandfather believed there was something wrong with the notarization date, I was going to find out what it was. That night, I opened my laptop, and for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt like I was finally tracing my way to a real crack in their lie. I filed a formal request with the bank for every document connected to my name. 10 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for nearly a full minute before opening it. There are moments when you know that a single tear of an envelope is enough to change everything. I was not wrong. The mortgage file was 12 pages long, and on 3 of those pages was what they claimed was my signature. I brought the papers closer to the desk lamp, set them beside my driver's license, and compared them carefully. To an outsider, they might have looked similar. To me, they did not. I had signed my name thousands of times through audit seasons, more than enough to know every familiar stroke by heart. My capital S always curved backward at the beginning because of the way I sign quickly. But on the loan documents, the S curved forward. It was rounder, slower, more deliberate. It was the signature of someone who knew what my name looked like, but had never truly watched me sign it. Then I checked the notarization date, September 15. Sen. My heart dropped. I opened my work calendar, went back to that month, and found it immediately: AICPA National Conference, Seattle. September 14 to 3. I still had the plane ticket, the hotel receipt, even an Instagram photo of me standing with 2 coworkers in front of the Space Needle on the afternoon of the 15th. While the loan papers claimed I had been in Colorado signing a mortgage and getting it notarized, I had actually been hundreds of miles away. At that point, it was no longer suspicion. It was provable fact. I sent everything to Marcus that same night. He replied almost immediately, "This is exactly what we need. Now we're not just defending, we're going on offense." For the first time since the overdue notice arrived, I felt something close to hope. Not hope that my family would feel remorse, but hope that the truth might finally speak louder than the lie. What I found in the loan file was already serious enough. But Marcus did not stop there. He obtained a subpoena to force the bank to hand over all internal communications and correspondence related to the loan file with my name on it. I still remember the evening Marcus called me. His voice different from usual. There is a certain tone lawyers get when they have just uncovered something that could overturn an entire case. And I heard it in his very first words: "Sienna, sit down." Then Marcus read me the email chain between Melody and a loan officer named Kevin Torres. The first message from Melody asked whether there was any way to add my name to the file even though I was not physically present. Because I was out of town on a work trip, Kevin replied that if there were a valid power of attorney or a proper remote signing process, the bank could proceed. But otherwise, I would need to be present for notarization. Melody's next email made my blood run cold. She wrote that I could not sign remotely because I was at a conference, and asked whether my father can handle the paperwork instead. Kevin replied that as long as the documents were notarized properly, the application could still move forward. I sat silently in my kitchen, feeling as if I were watching a slow-motion recording of my own life being stolen. Melody knew I was not there. She had actively looked for a way to put my name on the file anyway. The bank employee had either been careless or had chosen to look the other way. And my father, the man who had always lectured everyone about morals, honor, and family, was the one who would handle the paperwork. That was the moment I stopped seeing Melody as just a spoiled younger sister who had been indulged too much. She had played an active role in this. She had not been dragged along. She had not stumbled into it by accident. She knew I had not agreed. And she still searched for a way to put my name on a massive debt. That truth hurt even more than what my parents had done, because until then, some part of me had still wanted to believe that maybe Melody had not fully understood what was happening. But after those emails, I had nothing left to hold on to. After we had gathered the initial evidence, Marcus advised me to take one more step, one I knew was necessary. But it still broke my heart. File a report against my own family. I went to the Denver Police Department on a weekday morning carrying a thick stack of documents: the mortgage papers, plane tickets, photographs, emails from the bank, and old correspondence between Melody and me. When the officer sitting across from me asked what I wanted to report, it took me several seconds before I could finally say the words out loud: identity fraud, signature forgery. Saying those words about my parents and my sister felt like tearing away the very last illusion I had about what family was supposed to mean. I signed the report, handed over the documents, listened to the standard responses like, "We'll review this," and walked back outside with a hollow feeling I can hardly describe. I did not know whether they would truly investigate, and I did not dare hope too much. But I knew I needed an official record. I needed a clear marker showing that this had been documented as wrongdoing, not dismissed as just a family conflict. A week later, my phone rang from an unknown number. It was a female detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. She told me that after reviewing the materials, they had decided to open a formal investigation into possible forgery and fraud connected to the mortgage. She asked me a question I still remember to this day: did I believe my family knew that what they had done was illegal? I was silent for a long time before answering honestly that I did not think they cared. They wanted the money. They wanted the house. And they wanted someone else to carry the consequences. What it would do to my credit, my career, and my life did not matter to them. After I hung up, I immediately saved every new message from my family into a separate folder. I had already learned that lesson when the truth has been twisted too many times. Evidence becomes the only thing still standing on your side. On December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas, I was served with a lawsuit at work. The process server did his job professionally, calmly, as if this were just one more file in his day. While I stood there holding the envelope, feeling as if someone had just punched a hole straight through my chest. Inside was a formal complaint filed by my parents in Douglas County Civil Court. They were demanding that I pay $682. Ling ling ling. Plus court costs and attorney's fees, based on what they called a verbal agreement and unjust enrichment. Before I could even catch my breath from that shock, the second attack began. Social media. Melody posted a long message on Facebook, written in that half-tearful, half-self-righteous tone, about how some people care more about money than blood, and how her parents were at risk of losing their retirement because of their older daughter's pride. She never mentioned my name, but she did not need to. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. Hundreds of reactions, dozens of comments full of prayers, sympathy, and criticism of the ungrateful sister. Aunt Patricia joined in too, saying that eventually everyone shows their true colors. I watched my story being rewritten in real time. In their version, I was the cold-hearted daughter standing by while my parents collapsed. No one mentioned the forged signature. No one mentioned identity fraud. No one said that they had dragged me into that debt without ever asking. Those details did not serve the role they wanted me to play. I drafted several responses, then deleted all of them. Marcus told me not to step onto that battlefield. Every word I wrote could be cut apart, screenshotted, and twisted in the worst possible way. So I stayed silent and watched my reputation being torn apart by people who had never once asked whether any of it was actually true. The most painful part was not being accused. It was realizing how many people were perfectly willing to believe the worst about me without ever hearing a single word from my side. That Christmas arrived like an ordinary day washed in coldness. I knew my family was gathered together without anyone having to tell me, because my nephew posted Instagram stories of everyone wearing matching pajamas around the tree at my parents' house. My mother, my father, Melody, Derek, the kids, Aunt Patricia, even Grandpa Harold in his usual chair by the fireplace. Everyone was there except me. No invitation. No question. Not even a polite message. I had been erased from the frame, both literally and figuratively. I watched that story several times, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because it showed me what they had always done: best perform unity. In that photo, they looked like a warm, loving family pulling together through a difficult time caused by one cold-hearted daughter. If I had not known the truth, I might have believed in the beauty of that picture too. That night, my mother sent me exactly one message: "You chose this. So remember that." I stared at the text for a long time and did not reply. I put my phone down, ordered Thai food, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in my living room surrounded by legal files instead of Christmas gifts. I thought I would not cry. I was too tired to cry. But then a private message appeared from my grandfather's Instagram account. He barely knew how to use technology, so the fact that he had even managed to send it made my eyes burn. He wrote that he was sorry, that he had tried to stop them but could not, and that he wished me a peaceful Christmas. That was when I broke down. Not because I had been excluded, I had expected that, but because at last, There was one person in the family who saw me, believed me, and had the courage to say so. On a holiday, when everyone else was united in turning me into an outsider. One message from him was enough to remind me that the truth still existed somewhere, even if only in a fragile form. On the day of the hearing, I wore the charcoal gray suit I usually saved for my most important presentations. I arrived 30 minutes early. Not because I was overwhelmed with nerves, but because I needed a few quiet minutes to remind myself that I was not walking into that room as the daughter being judged in the Brennan family living room. I was there as a grown woman with a lawyer, with evidence, and with every right to protect herself. When my parents and Melody entered the courtroom, accompanied by their attorney and a few relatives, I looked at them and felt neither love nor clear hatred anymore. Mostly, I felt tired. Their lawyer began with a story about broken promises. Melody took the stand and testified that at Christmas dinner 2 years earlier, I had said I would think about helping, and then nodded. To her, that nod meant yes. My father repeated almost the same version, saying he had never imagined his own daughter would disappoint her parents so deeply. They avoided mentioning the mortgage file, avoided mentioning the signature, avoided mentioning the notarization date. Their entire case was built on a nod no one could prove. Then Marcus stood up. He presented the mortgage documents, the plane tickets, hotel receipts, photos from Seattle, and asked me to sign my name right there in court. When my 3 fresh signatures were placed beside the one on the loan file, the difference was obvious enough for the entire courtroom to see. Marcus then submitted the email chain between Melody and the loan officer. He read every line out loud. Melody's question about adding my name while I was away. The reply saying it could proceed if the documents were properly notarized. And the final line, where she said my father could handle it instead. In that moment, it felt as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. Melody went pale. Derek looked at his wife as if he were seeing a stranger. And I sat there in silence, feeling for the first time in months that the truth had finally walked into the courtroom with me. When the judge dismissed my parents' lawsuit with prejudice, I heard the gavel strike and felt as if a rope that had been tightening around my throat for 6 months had finally been cut. But that was not the end. Marcus immediately presented my counterclaims for identity fraud, signature forgery, damage to my credit, and harm to my professional reputation. The bank was forced to open an internal investigation as well. A few months later, the loan officer was fired. The notary, who turned out to be a friend of my father's, lost his license. My name was completely removed from the mortgage, and my credit report was fully restored. My family was ordered to pay all of my legal fees. None of it felt triumphant. It felt more like surviving a fire that your own house had set. After that, everything fell apart quickly. Melody and Derek separated. My parents were forced to sell the house because without my name backing the mortgage, they could no longer carry the loan. My mother sent me a short email accusing me of ruining them. I did not reply. Aunt Patricia called to apologize. And that was the only apology I ever received from anyone in the family. Grandpa Harold wrote me a handwritten letter saying that he had changed his will and that I would be taken care of, because at least one person in the family needed to stand by me. 6 weeks later, he passed away. I sat in the back row at his funeral, quiet in the same way I had always existed within that family. As for me, I kept living. I was promoted. I went to therapy. I changed my last name to Burke as a way of reclaiming the right to define myself. I began to understand that peace is not something family gives me. It is something I have to build for myself, with boundaries that no longer come wrapped in guilt. I did not choose money over blood. I chose integrity. I chose my signature. I chose my own life. And for the first time, that was enough. If my story made you see some part of yourself in it, if you too have had to stand up and protect your boundaries against the very people who were supposed to love you most, then subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the stories ahead. Maybe in one of them, you will find the strength you have been needing too.